Morning, everybody. We're going to be talking about use of VR for training today, and I think we may have just lost Amy, who will be co-hosting this with me. Let's give her a minute and see if we can get her back. While we wait for Amy to come back, I'll just go through a little bit about what we're going to show you today. So we're going to be going through a training scenario we built here at Sheffield Hallam University in Centric, which is where I work, called Atlas, and it's a virtual reality training simulation for civilian IOM staff. It's designed to train them on what to do when they have or when they're caught in an attack on a convoy. There we go. Hi, Amy.
Hi, good morning. Joe, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. You?
I'm good. So let me start by giving a welcome to all the colleagues that are joining us. I'm going to facilitate this morning a bit in a moderator role. I think Ismail's having some audio challenges, but I want to just start off by welcoming everyone to this edition of IOM Learn on Air. This is a series that really is about knowledge sharing among colleagues to help us think of different ways that we can utilize staff development and training to enhance the way that we are learning and implementing our programs across IOM. So this morning, we're going to be speaking about virtual reality, which is something that we've just started experimenting with, I would say, piloting in IOM. And I'm very delighted to have joining with me this morning Jonathan Sanders. He's a special games developer, a serious games developer, sorry, at Centric, which is a nonprofit research center that's based at Sheffield Hallam University in the UK. He had a background in dealing with developing serious games across a number of sectors. And this includes development of virtual reality and augmented reality. And so we're going to have an opportunity to learn more about that over the course of this session. I should also introduce myself. So my name is Amy Rhodes. I sit in the Media Communications Division at headquarters in IOM, and I work particularly on community engagement and looking at how we can develop digital tools to enhance our work. And it's through that particular area that we have started working a bit on virtual reality and looking at how it can add value to the work that we're doing in IOM. In addition to working on training aspects, I also work quite a bit on community engagement, helping enhance the communications in the field with the communities where we work, and developing feedback mechanisms and digital communication tools to facilitate that aspect. So it's just a bit of background about who your facilitators are on the call this morning. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about our subject, and then I'm going to have Joe speak a bit to the topic of virtual reality. So we recognize this morning that technology is increasingly playing a critical role in enabling how we perform and how we learn, and in particular, the role of technology is providing solutions. It's getting more attention in terms of being able to really allow us to learn at an accelerated rate. And that's why we're particularly interested in discussing this topic this morning. So I wanted to start off asking you, Joe, to speak a bit to the role of technology in learning, and when it is appropriate, and how this technology can be used to create a more stimulating learning environment.
Okay. Well, what you find is as we go more and more into the technological age, the use of technology to aid learning is just increasing. And the technologies we're talking about today, virtual reality and serious games, they've actually been used for over 30 years already. What people don't understand is virtual reality has been used from day one in the 80s for pilot training. And examples of where the benefits of that can be seen are, for instance, when there was a plane crash in America in the Hudson River, and the pilot managed to land the plane in the river without any loss of life. And the only reason he could do that is because he had completed over 600 hours of virtual reality simulations on practicing how to land a plane on water. So these are examples of ways in which virtual reality has been used to enhance training, and it's been used previously. So what you'll find is before it was mainly used in the aviation industry or in the military especially, and it has also been used quite a lot for firefighters as well. Now we're coming into a more modern era where technology is far more accessible. We're seeing these technologies used everywhere, to train surgeons and doctors, to train engineers on oil stations, and with you guys to train your staff on what to do to keep safe in a dangerous situation. And what we're finding is more and more benefits are being exposed or found from these, because we're having more and more studies with the technology. One study, which was conducted by a man called Bowman, showed that if you train somebody to do a search task, so for instance looking for a dangerous bag in a station, if you train them to do it in virtual reality before they go to the real location, instead of talking through it in a tabletop exercise, that their success rates are improved significantly in terms of how quickly they can find a bag, and they can understand whether that bag might be dangerous or not, depending on where it might be left. So those are just a few examples of where serious games and this technology have started coming out and showing the improvements to learning and meeting learning objectives.
That's great. Thanks, Joe. I appreciate the really practical examples of how this type of technology has been used in developing training. And I'm looking forward to sharing with the viewers today examples that we have used here in IOM as well. I just wanted to talk through a few of the advantages that I think exist in terms of virtual reality and how it can really enhance the learning environment. So one of those aspects is that it makes learning much more visual. The immersive environment contributes to a much more active learning environment, and studies show that 90% of the information that is sent to our brain is visual in nature. So when you're able to put a person into an environment and experience something, then it's going to have a much greater impact than if someone is just talking through a particular subject. It also can make learning much more affordable. And I think an aspect that goes along with this, particularly for IOM, which is a decentralized organization spread out over 169 countries, it makes it scalable as well. So if we're developing a virtual reality scenario, then we're able to roll that out across a number of different duty stations, different environments, rather than the cost of doing in-person training. Another aspect I think that makes VR really valuable is it's safer as well. Being able to introduce people to certain types of risks in a VR environment allows them to understand what types of dangers might exist without actually being in that particular environment. It can be implemented remotely. So this is really valuable, as I mentioned, when working in a decentralized organization across a number of widely varying contexts. It allows us to roll out a similar training across these different regions. And then last but not least, it aids to retention and recall. So being in an actual environment, going through an experience, whether it's as you'll see in the upcoming scenario, a security convoy trying to understand how to respond, or whether it's a simulation for example, flight attendants who need to identify signs of trafficking and putting them in an environment where, in VR, where they have to identify those signs, can really add to the retention and recall of what they've learned in the VR environment. So that said, I want to turn it back over to Joe to talk a little bit through the process of building a prototype. In VR, what are the steps in terms of design and production, and then actually being able to roll it out?
So normally how we start is we talk to an end user, so you guys in this example, and we find out so we figure out what your learning objectives are with your training, how you're going to meet those, and what it is you need in order to meet your training requirements. From the back of that, we can build a requirements document which lists everything you require, whether it's certain types of interactions in your game, or whether it's artificial intelligence, or certain types of events to happen. And then that starts to get built up into small demos, which we show to you guys, the end users, and then we get feedback from. So it's a feedback loop of development where you make sure that what you're making is exactly to the requirements of the end user. And using this method, we've created quite a few serious games, both virtual reality and non-virtual reality, which have so far been very close to the mark, exactly what people need for their training requirements. And sometimes, so what we've had some people who need a real world environment recreated. So as an example, in one of our projects, we've created Montana Station, which is an underground train station in Barcelona. And that is like for like exactly the same. So they can train their staff without needing to shut the station down, which is a big issue for them. Whereas for others, it's not required to have a real location represented. So we can make one that just meets the learning requirements for you. So in the case of the convoy attack you're going to see today, it wasn't required for the location to be the same as a real world location. So it was made to fit the story of the scenario, which in this case is your convoy is attacked after it turns around a blind corner around the cliff.
Great, thanks. I think for us, as we were developing the simulation, it was really interesting, the process of storyboarding and thinking through what are the different scenes. And I'll be happy to speak to that a bit more during the questions if people would like more information on how that goes. And I think another really important point that you brought up is the itinerant nature of the design process, so that we continue to provide feedback and refine the design. And for us, of course, it was really important in the context of the security convoy to make it very realistic to what this would be like for a staff member in the field with IOM. So that said, I wanted to just speak quickly to the partnership and the collaboration with Centric at Sheffield Hallam University. We established an MOU with them between IOM and Sheffield Hallam University, and this has been really valuable because Centric is an academic partner, and they're very interested in being able to develop technology that has valuable real-world impact. And we've been working with them on a number of different collaborations, one of which you'll see in the security convoy scenario, which is the development of a mobile app called SCAN, the Security Communications and Analysis Network, which we're piloting in a number of missions across IOM, and it allows IOM staff to send a report, send a message, let our 24/7 Security Communications Center in Manila know if there is an issue. And I'll speak to that a little bit more after the scenario is completed. But now maybe I'll turn it over to you, Joe. I think this is the moment that people are waiting for, to be able to view the scenario and experience the this particular VR simulation that we've developed jointly with you all.
Okay, yeah. So we're going to be looking at the scenario from two different perspectives here. We've got my camera here, and what you can see behind me is the main scenario running up here. Just close it down. So you've got the virtual reality scenario on the screen behind me here, which is close out a pop-up. And then from the other screen, we will be showing you exactly what the virtual reality user can see as well.
Okay, great.
Cool. So I'll just get that set up and ready to go.
Okay, terrific. While he's doing that, I'm actually going to show a poster. Let me grab 1 second. Oops, let me click on myself here. So this is actually a poster that shows the demo of the security convoy that we conducted here at headquarters. It took place in October of last year, and it was a great opportunity for IOM staff to experience the simulation themselves. We got a lot of user feedback, and it helped us refine the scenario. We had the DDG participate, a lot of heads of units, department directors that participated in the scenario, and I think it was a concrete way for people to see the value of virtual reality and think about how to use it in their own work. Okay, so now I'll turn it back over to Joe.
So now you should be able to see what the VR user would be seeing in the headset. So my colleague Andrew here is going to demonstrate for us. If you'd like to start the demo, Andrew. Okay, so you start the simulation in a convoy of 3 vehicles. You are in the central vehicle, and in the vehicle in front of you, you can find there'll be 3 UN peacekeepers who are escorting your convoy. You're a civilian member of the IOM staff, and in the vehicle behind you, you can see a 3rd vehicle which has more IOM staff in it. So the design of this is you get about 60 seconds to familiarize yourself with virtual reality. You can look at your hands, you're sitting in the back of the car, so you can understand that, okay, I'm a person in the back of the car and I'm about to be assaulted basically by insurgents. Okay, so the vehicle now, and Andrea's trying to find out where she's being attacked from. So what you'll find here is this bit's designed so that the user assesses their situation, looks around, and then finds the safest route out. So Andrea's identified that on the right-hand side, they're being shot at from above, and now she needs to find somewhere safe to go. So she's going to have a look around. You can see everybody's hiding behind the cars. They're using the engine block or the wheel arches because they are the strongest structural points of the vehicles. And she's got a choice here. She can jump into the ditch in front of her, but she doesn't know what is in there. Or she can start moving away from the gunfire. So she's going to move towards that rear vehicle now and take cover behind the vehicle next to this guy. And now she needs to look around and assess what's the next safest place to go to. So for her, the safest place to go to is probably a building just over on her left, yep. And she'll need to run over to that building. and then find somewhere safe to hide. Down in the corner is good. And at this point in time, she can use the scan app mentioned earlier to say, I need help. So the simulation is designed to test your ability to analyze a situation while under fire and while under a stressful situation, well, under stress. And through that, it exposes you to things you wouldn't normally see. So with your training, you might do this as a tabletop exercise or have to go to a physical environment where actors play out the parts. But through virtual reality, you can do this in the office. And because of that, it means that you can do this again and again. Or you could have loads of people just do it one after another. So you can get a lot of people trained quite quickly using a system like this. Thanks, Andrea.
Great. Thanks, Joe. So I think that is really helpful to show the experience that a person has when they're in the VR environment. Obviously, as a viewer, it's quite different for you watching it on a 2D screen as opposed to being actually in the environment yourself. But it gives you just a taste of what virtual reality looks like. And one of the key aspects, particularly for this security convoy scenario, is the decision-making aspect. And so in a way, the scenario is testing training or reading that you've already had to see whether you apply that when you're in the actual scenario and under stress. There's also an audio track that accompanies the VR scenario, and so you hear the actual live gunfire, you hear people yelling in the background, and it adds to kind of the reality of the setting that you're in. And we're going to have a chance for people to ask questions. So as you were viewing the scenario, if you had any questions about how it was done, how it was developed, feel free to put those to the SDL so we can respond to those later. And as I mentioned, we worked also on very closely with Centric on developing a mobile application called Scan, which is allowing IOM staff to receive updates about any security questions, any security information in their local area, and also to send a message if they're not okay. There's also a geo-tracking aspect. So if, for example, in a scenario where you were separated from the convoy and you had the geo-tracking enabled on your phone, then it would be regularly pinging your location to our staff security unit in Manila, and they would be able to monitor that. So it can also be very useful in the situation of hostage taking or kidnapping, anything along those lines. So a bit of a demo of a couple pieces of technology we're working on with Centric. And now I'm going to move to the second scenario. Joe, if we can set that up. Mm-hmm. Following the success of the security convoy simulation, we recognize the value also of creating a scenario that allows people to visit or understand a context where they themselves wouldn't necessarily be able to go. And so in this particular scenario, we are showing it's based on an art series called Refugees Unpacked. And basically, the artist used suitcases and created the artwork within the suitcase, and it replicates the room or the home where a refugee came from and what it was like. And then this we paired with a podcast where the refugee, who's a young man now living in New York, but he is talking about his experience about the bomb that came through his home and why his family had to flee. And so I think this is also really valuable aspect in terms of being able to help people understand and reflect on a situation potentially very different from their own. So back over to you, Joe.
Okay, thank you, Amy. So what you're seeing here is one of the pieces from the Refugee Unpacked exhibition, which was being held in New York over Christmas. And this is a home that's been reconstructed from a man called Ahmed Badr, who emigrated to America back in 2001, I believe. And the story shown in here is the story of what his home was like after it had been attacked. So when he lived at home, his house was struck by a missile, and it flew through one wall, straight through the house with all his family in there, through another wall, and straight through 3 gas canisters, which luckily were empty at the time. And it also didn't explode. So they all survived, and it's a bit of a miracle with that. But this is their story, and this is what's shown in here. And what we've done with this virtual reality exhibition is we allow you to get closer than you could in real life. So in real life, this is a small suitcase on a wall. But in virtual reality, you can get inside. So we let users get inside and get close up to all of the exhibits, basically. And this allows you to explore the location you're in and get a close-up view of all of the different elements of the home. So you can see through a hole in the wall where the missile flew through, or you can look at the gas canisters in the kitchen. And this is designed with more of an experience in mind. So while you're looking around here, you can hear a podcast from Ahmed, which is the story of how all this happened and then their lives following this when they emigrated to the United States. And we found this to be really successful in showing the emotional connection to this. So as an example, when we first made this, I demonstrated it to Ahmed in New York, and he cried when he first tried it because it was just like his home at home, and he felt like he could reach out and touch his table and his walls. And that's the magic of when you see it, your brain believes it's there even if it's not. And it was nice to see that reaction from him. And then when we showed it at the International Migrants Day, we had similar reactions from other people where they were amazed how lifelike it looked while they were inside the simulation. There we go. So as you can see, there was only one suitcase that was modeled. However, there is a number of other suitcases available in the exhibition which weren't put in for this demonstration. This was just due to time constraints, as this whole scenario was built within a month. It was a very, very quick turnaround, but was definitely worth it for the feedback we got. Because people who tried it or came to the event included the Director General of the United Nations, Vanessa Redgrave, Liam Neeson was there, and we had a lot of number of high-profile people who were at the event and were really amazed at the outcome and the feedback we got. Thank you, Andrea. So I think we've lost Amy again, and I'm not sure if we can hear her at the moment. So while we wait for her to reconnect, what I can talk you through is how we build, a bit more about how we build these systems and how we build these technologies. So far, all of these virtual reality systems are built using a headset called the HTC Vive, and this is off the shelf and available at home. So we're trying to design all of our systems so that they can be utilized using your standard technology you can buy in any normal high street store. As an example, all these VR demos you've seen today are played on a standard computer and the headset, and costs little more than, well, costs less than $2,000 for the whole setup. Ah, brilliant. Welcome back, Amy.
Yeah, apologies, a little technical error there.
That's right.
So that was an introduction to another VR simulation that we've set up. And as Joe mentioned, this was launched in New York. It was actually at the UN headquarters on the 18th of December, which is International Migrants Day, as we all know. And it in fact drew a very high profile audience. We had the Secretary General of the UN there, our Director General, as well as Vanessa Redgrave and Liam Neeson, who are actors in the US, and a number of other dignitaries that came both to see the activities for International Migrants Day as part of the Global Migration Film Festival, and also this art exhibition, Unpacked Refugees, which included the VR simulation. So it was an excellent opportunity to introduce VR to the audience that was there in New York. So another aspect that I want to mention is the value of being able to reach audiences that you typically might not be able to, and transport them to another time and place through VR. And one thing, Joe, that I think was very powerful that you mentioned was Ahmed revisiting his home after years of having left, and the emotional response that brings, which is great. So another aspect that I want to mention, and I know that it's come up in the questions as well, is as a projectized organization, we're always interested in budget considerations and thinking about how to develop a VR scenario that adequately captures whatever type of scene or training that we're working on developing. So Joe, could you talk us through a little bit the scalability? I know in our own discussions that we were looking at the number of scenes and the detail, and I think that in considering VR, those are some of the aspects that vary according to the budget.
Yeah. So projects can range from a small project which doesn't have a lot in the way of interaction or complex behavior, to very complex systems where you've got multiple users training simultaneously over the internet. And what we find is obviously the timelines and the prices change depending on what you need. So as an example, the last demonstration we just saw here, we saw the Unpacked Refugee example, which, like I said, took about a month to create. That was a very quick turnaround, a very small project, but it was very much a lot of work done in a very short amount of time. Traditionally, you want longer than that on a project. I would suggest that for a small project, you want 3 months. You want 1 month lead up, which is when you use, that's when you have your meetings and you gain your requirements. So what does the end user need? What do they require? And that's a lot of toing and froing, a lot of meetings. Make sure you get that right. Because if you get that bit right, the rest of the project runs really smoothly. And then you use the next 2 months of development time. And so for small scale projects, example would be something like where you have to look around an environment, or where you need to, I don't know, maybe interact with something a bit more simple, like you're trying to use a certain system, like, I don't know, you're waving people through a gateway or something like that. Whereas if you want a more complex system, that's where you start getting a longer project, which is more like 6 months to a year. So for instance, if you're going to have an artificial intelligence in there so that you can interact with digital agents, that's where you start getting a larger project. And what you find is you start going towards those when your training requirements get a bit more complex. So for instance, if I want to train my staff on how to interact with clients. So let's say we have clients who come in and we need to, I don't know, do a security check on them. So we need to make sure, okay, so maybe we want to check to make sure they're not carrying anything on them before they come into our area. You know, so we're going to run a scanner over them. In which case, we want to have some sort of interaction with that person. You want then their behavior controlled by an AI. That would be a slightly larger one. And all of these change and depend on what the requirements are. What you find is for budgets, they can range from anything as small as £20,000 or US dollars, I'll say $20,000, all the way up to over anything, depending on what your requirements are. But the more you make in one go, so the larger a system you build at once, the cheaper it gets and the quicker it becomes, because you can use those same systems between different scenarios, between different requirements. So what you find is when you do a small-scale system that you require one scenario, it may take you 3 months. But if you want to do 6 scenarios, it might only take you 12 months, because you can reuse a lot of the stuff you created for the original scenario, which can shorten the time and the budget requirements.
Great, thank you. That's helpful to think through. So a couple additional questions have come in. One which I'll give to you, Joe, and the other which I'll respond to myself. The first one is asking about the software that's used to develop the VR, and what are the hardware software requirements in order to deploy it in a given context. And then the second question, which I'll respond to, is other areas of IOM where we could use VR. And just a reminder, if you're viewing online, feel free to give us additional questions. We're happy to respond. So over to you, hardware, software requirements, Joe.
Okay. So for us, we make the virtual reality games using the Unity games engine. And the games engine is a tool which contains a lot of the base requirements you need just to build a game, a standard computer game. The reason we choose to use Unity is it means we can develop a game that will run both on a PC like this one here, and on your mobile phone, and over the internet, and on the web. So it's quite an adaptable engine we can use. And we combine that with 3D modeling tools and coding tools to build a virtual environment. And then the standard we use, or standard virtual reality headset we use, is the HTC Vive, simply because currently it allows the most freedom of movement. We find that movement's very important with virtual reality, and with the Vive, all you need is 2 cameras set up, like this one you can see behind me just here, and then you can walk around an environment up to a space of about 5 by 5 meters, is the largest area you will. There are other softwares and systems available. For instance, you could use the Unreal Engine, which is a different games engine, which looks nicer, but requires a lot more implementation time, so slows down projects. And there's another headset, for instance, many people might have heard of the Oculus Rift, which allows you to move, but only in a smaller area because you have one camera in front of you. As for the requirements to run these, they have the virtual reality serious games have the same requirements as any standard game. So what you'd find is, if you're looking for a system that would run it, it's the same system that would run a computer game. So, as an example of what I'm using here, we are using a laptop which is called an Alienware, which is built by Dell. And that's a good standard laptop you can use to run virtual reality simulations. You can save money by going for a desktop because they're cheaper. And you find that, depending on what you want, you can get a good VR virtual reality setup running for less than $1,500.
Great, thanks. And so then the question that I'll respond to is other areas where we can use VR in the work that we do at IOM. And I think that this is a great question. And I've had some initial conversations with colleagues, certainly here at headquarters, but also in the field. And I think one of the goals of this particular SDL webinar is to get you thinking about how it could be used in your work as well. So a few areas that I've thought about where we do quite a bit of training and where we could potentially use VR is trafficking, which I mentioned before, potentially working with airline staff, helping them in a VR environment, detect and really understand the signs of trafficking. We work quite a bit also in camp management. So being able to simulate a camp environment and detecting the standards for camp management. Are there certain things that are not up to standard? How we could train people to understand the CCCM, camp coordination, camp management requirements through virtual reality. Another area where we do significant amounts of training is in border management. So working with border officials and helping them identify different types of documents, which documents are valid, which are not, how to really manage a border post. I think that could be an interesting scenario to develop through VR. And then another one is psychosocial aspects in terms of staff welfare, but also the people that we work with in the field, being able to understand aspects related to psychosocial and how we can detect and respond more effectively to psychosocial needs in the field. So let me see, there's another question on how SDL can help. I'm not the best place to respond to that, but certainly MCD has been working closely with SDL, so Media and Communications Division, where I sit, working closely with SDL, our Staff Development and Learning Unit, in terms of enhancing our training and looking at new and emerging technologies, such as VR. I think that Ismail and his colleagues could respond at greater length in via email or phone if you have specific requests. But as we have developed this MOU with Centric, MCD plays a role in providing technical support for developing new projects. And if you're interested in potentially using VR or developing a scenario for a project that you're working on, particularly with a training focus, then please do get in touch with Ismail or myself, and we can explore that further. I think that would be a really interesting thing to discuss further. There's another question that has come in, and this one I'll pass over to you probably, Joe. I think you're best situated to answer it. The question is, how long would a project take for a VR course of 30 minutes and the cost involved? So I guess the scenarios that we've looked at are fairly concise. What about a much more elaborate VR scenario?
So what you'd find is if you wanted a 30-minute virtual reality scenario, you need to make sure that your users are used to VR before they start that. So traditionally, the VR scenarios we use are quite short. They last anything, well, for instance, the ones we've seen today, you can be in there from 2 to 15 minutes. It depends on the person who's doing the scenario. If they know what they're doing, they'll finish it in 2 minutes. If they are new to the scenario and they are learning the ropes and they don't know what the correct actions are and they're sitting there and they're assessing it, it can take people a lot longer. If you're referring to a scenario which is designed to last for 30 minutes, then that is a much larger feat. And it depends on what you want. If you want that to be prescribed, which means it is the events in the scenario are pre-dictated, so it's a very linear scenario where you do A and then you do B and then you do C. That could take anything from, depending on what behaviors or complexities you wanted within that could take around about a year to develop. The prices vary because it depends on what system you want, what staff we would need to put in. So in our case, we would, on a standard small-scale scenario, we would have at least one artist and one programmer working on that full time. And so for a small scale scenario, that would take staff, we look at it's about £100,000, or so in pounds, $150,000 to you guys for years to create that scenario. But that changes depending on what systems you want to put in there. Because that's when we'll put in someone with experience in artificial intelligence programming or physics programming if you want to have any physics simulations built into. So it's hard to give a definitive answer to something, to a question like that, because it depends wholly on the requirements that go within it. But yeah, 30-minute scenario is a much larger and longer scenario, so you find it has a larger development time.
Sure, that's helpful. And maybe one thing that I would add, just to mention, that the security demo which we did was well received and has been helpful as a pilot. And we're also looking at developing the scenarios of the SAFE training. I'm sure many of you who are viewing today have participated in the SAFE training, which is the security for staff in the field, which is run by IOM or by UNDSS in some cases. And it goes through a number of simulations, including a border, an illegal border post, landmines, an attack, hostage taking. And so we're looking at the possibility to develop a series of VR simulations, because it's becoming increasingly challenging to provide the SAFE training to all of the staff that need it. As IOM grows and we're continue to be very dispersed across the globe, this could potentially be an option for us to offer SAFE training to a wider number of staff. And so that could potentially be put together in a sequence of a longer scenario, or we could do separate scenarios and then take people out of the VR to debrief afterwards. Okay, why did you make that decision? What would have been the most appropriate way to respond in that scenario? So I think there's a lot of different options in terms of how to develop scenarios in VR. So that being said, I think there's no other questions on the line at this point. I just want to take this opportunity to thank SDL, Ismail and his colleagues, for inviting us to share with you all on this webinar today. Thank also Joe and his colleagues at Centric. It's really been a positive partnership, one of the best that I've been in IOM, and it, I think, brings together two really complementary skill sets in terms of IOM and the really interesting and critical work that we're doing in the field, and Centric's expertise in technology and their research background has worked really well as a collaboration. And then, of course, I want to thank all of you who are watching today for your questions and for joining us. And we look forward to following up if you have additional questions. Thanks again.
Thank you.